Hello, and welcome to a Science Standards of Alaska tutorial, a helpful guide to focusing on phenomena in your classroom, presented by me, Alexandria Tannehill-Smith, a 7-year science teacher. The Science Standards for Alaska were developed as a student-centered approach to science instruction to engage students and facilitate educators to engage in a new way of looking at science in their classrooms. They are based on the Framework for K-12 Science Education, published by the National Academies Press. Let's start this guide off by saying don't feel frustrated. So often, educators feel like they are tossed new hoops to jump through every day, but linking your current curriculum and the new SSAs, or Science Standards of Alaska, together is way more manageable and doable than you might think. I'm going to take you through the 4 key steps that I use in developing my own curricula and linking them to our new SSAs. The first is focusing on the phenomena, then finding and filling in gaps, fueling our student engagement, and finally flowing into a new phenomena. So let's focus on the phenomena. Well, what the heck even is it? It can seem daunting to find phenomena, but it is simply any observable situation that exists or happens, especially ones that raise questions. Or to put it not so eloquently, any cool stuff that happens that makes us ask questions because we can't explain it right away. For example, how does water get to the tops of plants against gravity? How or why do plants grow towards their light source? Why are plants green? All of these questions focus on phenomena or questions that exist in our world, and we can find the answers to those. So in focusing on the phenomena, we're going to pull up one of our standards. This is a middle school life science standard, 2-5 specifically, that says students who demonstrate understanding can evaluate competing design solutions for maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem services. This focuses specifically on some verbiage that I want to point out. Designing solutions, social consideration and ecosystem services, evaluating yours and others' work, biodiversity's influence on our use of technology. When I look at this standard, it can seem very overwhelming at first, but it's truly broken into 3 main parts: the science and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, or, as you might recall from our webinar series, the main content that we need to teach, and then our cross-cutting concepts, which are how we connect those to other fields of science. If I pull out these specific keywords, what I start to develop in my mind is a STEM challenge. A STEM challenge specific on biodiversity and our use of technology in our world to be able to provide good ecosystem services to maintain the balance of harmony within our own globe. So let's look to nature for the answers to our problems. This is a STEM design challenge on biomimicry. I will use this example to show you how I hit those 4 F key words that we started with at the beginning. So a question that I would pose to my students is, what do the leaves of plants and solar panels have in common? And you can facilitate this question through any type of discussion, a think, pair, share, a daily bell ringer prompt, etc. I'm sure you have wonderful ideas for developing discussion in your classroom. Hopefully your students eventually come around to the idea that plants and solar panels both use radiant or light energy and convert it to a usable form. Plants specifically convert sunlight energy into stored chemical energy in the form of glucose. This begins the entire food web process. Whereas solar panels convert sunlight energy into electricity used to power homes and businesses. This minimizes the use of fossil fuels and encourages renewable energy. Right here we're seeing some parallels between a leaf and a piece of technology that has been designed in our world today. So let's fill in the gaps of our knowledge so that we can ultimately have a STEM design challenge that our students can feel confident and successful entering into. So we need to recall and review the content we are connecting this phenomena to. We really want to hear our students at this point go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." That is music to our ears. So addressing and connecting our prior knowledge is absolutely key. Your existing lessons and notes are critical in forming this whole linkage to the new SSAs in order to helpfully get your students designing, evaluating, and creating models at a very high level of thinking. So in order for students to successfully undertake a design process, they must first have the background knowledge on how certain processes work through developing understanding on basic form and function. So your existing lessons and notes are absolutely crucial here in making sure that students have the prior knowledge and the background knowledge to even begin to understand what it would take to synthesize or create a whole new idea based on a phenomena you are presenting them. Just a side note, Boom cards are one of my favorite ways to teach and review material. If you haven't checked out boomlearning.com before, this online platform is an amazing and interactive visual way to connect your students and get them retaining information that you really need them to. You can check my own personal resources out at sciencesbooming.com. In order to fuel the engagement, we should ask a question and provide an example of a phenomena that we can link to our existing curriculum. For example, I could ask a question like, how do we use living organisms to help develop technologies that help sustain our own planet? In order to fuel engagement with my own students during our Biomimicry Design Challenge, I needed to connect existing, authentic, or real-life examples and practices to this lesson idea. We watched a YouTube video, which you can find at the blue link, that talked about a train in 1989 in Japan that was causing havoc in a residential area because of the sonic boom noise it made when exiting tunnels. The designer of this train just so happened to be a bird watcher. This video would take your students through the design process in looking to nature to solve our real-world problems. We also invited some members of our community in to set up an AQI monitor, or Air Quality Index monitor, and I asked the students through probing what type of biomimicry the AQI machine might have. The students came up with all sorts of answers, including, well, the filtration of fish gills, the pumping mechanisms of sea sponges. There was lots of fun ideas, and the students got to start connecting their prior knowledge to things that they may never have thought about before. So the first step in really making sure our engagement was high was going out and looking at nature, to be able to make observations in real time with our own senses. So we did a nature walk biomimicry I Spy challenge, where I introduced two vocabulary terms to my students, biotic and abiotic. And we talked about the Latin roots of bio and abio. And we came up with the fact that this must mean living and non-living features. So the first thing my students were asked to do was look around them and to be able to classify something as living or non-living. After that, we are lucky enough to live in Alaska, and so of course wilderness and its beautiful wildlife is endless here. The students were to look at 3 organisms that they spied along our nature walk at the beach and identify some adaptations or some characteristics that made those organisms so well suited to survive in their environment. We were lucky enough to see this little guy up here. We saw otters, sea lions, starfish, crab, barnacles, moss, trees, plants growing right out of the side of the cliff. The students had looked at their world today in a way that they never had before, because what they were looking for were creatures that were specifically adapted to their environment to be really good specialists at something. And our students were asked to pull that specialization and apply it to a technology we could develop to help people and the planet and the animals in our own world. This is a great time to talk about the global goals. If you haven't heard of globalgoals.org, I really encourage you to check it out. These goals help link the local and cultural aspects of the science standards of Alaska to your curriculum and lessons. They do this through a way that encompasses all of the goals of a utopian type society, or something that we really want to strive to as a society to make a better place and planet for all living creatures. This is my go-to resource for aligning design challenges. You can check these 17 goals out, and here are some images of the 17 goals in summary at globalgoals.org. The one we are specifically going to focus on today is number 12. Ecosystem services and the global goals. We want to be able to connect that ecosystem services verbiage in our standard to a phenomena-based strategy or a global goal that our world wants to work to develop solutions for. Number 12 talks about responsible consumption and production of materials and energy. Nature recycles everything. Nature leaves nothing to waste. So we should take a note from nature and apply that to our solution-making process. Some of the sub-targets of number 12, responsible consumption and production, are sustainable management and use of natural resources, responsible management of chemicals and waste, encouraging companies to adopt sustainable practices and sustainability reporting, And lastly, to support developing countries' scientific and technological capacity for sustainable consumption and production. If we are mindful of all of these subcategories and we really work to develop global citizenship skills in our students, then they can both connect locally and on a global scale as learners and solution makers. An amazing biomimicry resource that I found is asknature.org. There are tons and tons of actual authentic designs, developments, and products that are linked specifically to biomimicry strategies that we see in nature. I have my students go to this website and pour through many different types of inventions that were created or synthesized from looking to nature for solutions. My students do a small mini report on an existing idea, and then ultimately what we do is build to gaining them enough confidence to develop their own or synthesize their own design. So an example project of student work and evidence is my Biomimicry Mini Research Challenge. This is a small summary, and it is a template that you are welcome to use. I've provided 2 tiny URLs at the top that will link to that Ask Nature and the Biomimicry website to help your students guide their thinking process. So the 5 main questions I really want my students to focus on here is, what global goal or problem did you research? Linking back to those 17 global goals to develop a better tomorrow, what is my student focusing on? If I involve this as the heart of my planning, then I can make sure that my students are thinking on a scale where they are connecting locally and globally in order to develop and design solutions for tomorrow. That hits almost every SSA standard that there is out there. Number 2, what organism is involved in your biomimicry design challenge? What animal did you select? I personally put a bunch of photographs of different animals into a jar and had my students randomly pull out a quote-unquote spirit animal that would guide their design process. They really liked the mystery and the fate of this little activity. You could definitely have your students pick their own animal or plant. Number 3, what adaptations make this organism successful in its environment and how? So now we're really looking at what characteristics that your organism has that really allows it to be so successful, that allows it to occupy its niche in such an effective way. And how do those things help your animal? So the whole process of is very important for your student to focus on here. Number 4 asks, what adaptations are needed for your design that you are developing, your biomimicry design to work, both in the organism and in your design? So an example I give here, back to our original example, the adaptation to convert light energy is shared by both solar panels and plants. However, we have further adapted the solar panel to convert light energy into usable electricity instead of glucose. Then number 5, how will your biomimicry design help people in the world today? This is linking it back to number 1. What goal are you focusing on? What animal adaptations could help design a solution or product for that goal? And then lastly, how is that really going to help people? Is it, in fact, authentic in our world today? This is some very high-level thinking that I had my 7th graders who had never taken a biology course before work through. Off to the right, you can see a model that one of my students has designed using our junkyard lab. If you have a local recycling area, or at the beginning of the year you ask students to bring in, quote, clean junk, then you can have a wonderful junkyard area full of recyclables and odds and ends and knickknacks that your students can use in developing models. Again, we have to reiterate here that a model is not a working prototype. It is simply just a design that is showing what you are intending on producing. My student here has drawn out her design. We'll get to what this mystery item is in just a moment. Has drawn out her design and then created a model for her product. She conducted research and applied concepts to developing that model. So who would have thought that a vacuum cleaner was actually a phenomena-based learning tool? She was so excited about her idea, she went and asked our custodial staff if she could borrow their vacuum to see its anatomical working. She wanted to know the form and function of a vacuum so that she could apply her design process to that to improve it and create a better world. Ultimately, what she designed was a tibia collector. She focused on bees and their ability to collect pollen, tiny particles in mass amounts simply by coming into contact with them. She saw that on their tibias, or their bottom legs, there were tiny little hair-like structures that clung to any type of pollen or dust that was in its area. She knew what this adaptation was in helping the bees, but she wanted to apply this to human life. And so often we need help collecting and picking up tiny particles. She thought, hey, why not a vacuum? And her vacuum could help people, well, 1, exercise, but 2, get rid of allergies, improve their air quality. So I see her connecting back to our air quality monitor in our classroom, using less energy and time spent cleaning, and then using less electricity. Recycling the waste products was her huge hill to die on here. If you note back at her design, she has a balloon attached to her vacuum handle. And her intention here was that through a series of different mechanisms, including magnets and size filtration throughout the tube, that all that would be left remaining in the balloon or the collection bin would be material that is dust, dirt, debris, skin, dead or decaying kind of organic material, or things that had left behind that could actually be used to give nutrients, or like a fertilizer, to plants. And then from there, she would collect that material and put it into, you can see a little succulent pictured, and put it into a seedling bin to help give that plant nutrients. I love this idea because ultimately what she had decided is that when that plant grew, you could then give bees another place to pollinate, thus helping promote bee repopulation efforts that are going on in America right now. Back and review our life science standard and see if we hit some of our check marks that we had intended to. So first of all, did our students evaluate competing design solutions? Absolutely. They looked at each other's design process, they looked at their own, they evaluated these designs, and ultimately they came together and jointly agreed upon some design criteria and some ideas that would in fact be a possible implementation for a solution in our world today. Did our students focus on biodiversity? Did they look at the differences in nature and how each organism is specifically adapted to fill a niche? Yes. And did they use those characteristics and adaptations to help guide their design process? Absolutely. Did we focus on ecosystem services? For example, did we focus on things like water purification, nutrient recycling? I'll pause there. Absolutely. Our students looked at air quality index. Our students looked at recycling nutrients back to the environment the same way nature does. We are mimicking nature through our last checkbox down here, technology. We have absolutely met all of our STEM criteria here in some way. I do want to focus on this cross-cutting concept of stability and change that says small changes in one part of a system might cause larger changes in another part. This brings to our last F, flow into a new phenomena. We could flow into adaptations and natural selection, biotechnologies, renewable resources, or specifically here, human impact. We want to keep our phenomena cycling just like nature. So if I wanted to move on with human impact in the environment here, I could look at a question like this. Human impacts and unforeseen issues with biomimicry on a large scale. Not everything we do to mimic nature always turns out the way we intend. For example, pictured here, we can take the ingenious idea of beaver damming and apply that to the Yangtze River in China when building the Three Gorges Dam. This dam produces an insane amount of energy for surrounding areas. However, one of the biggest implications that was caused by this was mass amounts of flooding. Not only did this disrupt ecosystems and wildlife habitats, but it also displaced thousands of residents of China along the Yangtze River when their homes and lands were flooded. These implications can definitely be talked about because not always do we see issues when we have a really good intentioned idea. And so really thinking through that thought process, communicating ideas, peer reviewing sources, and evaluating our models is so critical in developing solutions that can really help all of our brothers and sisters in all nations around the world. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to view my presentation today. In the yellow, there are resource links to everything that I mentioned during the presentation. Please feel free to visit these or reach out if you have any questions. Thank you for viewing this video. Please check out this channel for more videos on the SSAs and other educational topics. For more information about the science standards for Alaska, including resources, planning guides, and tools, please visit the Department of Education and Early Development Standard webpage at the following link. Have a wonderful day and happy teaching.